Today, I'm joined by Dr. Pascal Vrticka, who is an associate professor at the Department of Psychology at the University of Essex, where he leads the Social Neuroscience of Human Attachment Lab. Pascal's research uses magnetic resonance imaging and functional near-infrared spectroscopy, both of which sound fascinating, to investigate brain structure and functioning, to help build our understanding of the neurobiological basis of human attachment and caregiving, especially in parents. Welcome, Pascal.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Good to have you. So my first question is, I guess it feels to me like most of us these days have grown up with the idea that women are natural caregivers. But I'm aware that there's a growing evidence base showing that men as well are kind of wired to be parents. Can you tell us a bit about how that works?
Yes, sure. I think that's a great question to start our conversation. So for quite some time, as you said, it was thought that only women are biologically wired to become parents, or in other words, that men are wired differently, and that neurobiologically speaking, they are just not made to become fathers. But there now is extensive and consistent evidence showing changes in man's biology and brain structure that happen during the transition to fatherhood and that persist beyond that time. So let me give you a couple of examples. So for example, on the neurobiological side, we know that testosterone, which is the primary male sex hormone, decreases when men become fathers, and that oxytocin, which is one of the main hormones important for caregiving and bonding, increases when men become fathers. And we know that the changes in those two hormones are linked. So the more testosterone decreases, the more oxytocin increases. And we think that this change in testosterone and oxytocin level helps men to focus more inwards towards the family and to nurture and care for their infants as their new role as fathers, right? And then on the brain side, we know that there are extensive changes in brain areas in new fathers related to thinking what others are thinking. So we call that theory of mind or mentalizing, but also feeling what others are feeling. We relate this to empathy, but this is of course also very strongly associated with attachment, bonding, and caregiving. And all of these changes, again, create the ideal basis for dads to look after and care for their children once they are born.
Okay, so there's a lot going on when men become dads, but in our brains and our bodies. And I guess it's context dependent, right? So I'm assuming that a sperm donor who has, you might say, in some ways, just become a father, this stuff would not be happening in him. So can you kind of talk a bit about what role time and sort of hands-on practice as a caregiver plays?
Yes, absolutely. So the key message here is that fathers, like mothers, are not born, they are made. And this means that practice is key. So there is a strong relationship between the amount of the changes in dad's body and brain and several other variables related to caregiving. And these variables include, for example, how involved fathers are in childcare activities, how they think about their role as fathers, how good the relationship is between them and their children, and many more. But again, let's talk about some examples, right? So, for example, we know that testosterone decreases and oxytocin increases more in those fathers who spend more time, and especially quality time, with their children. And we also know that the same holds true for changes in fathers' brain structure in those regions that I have just mentioned before, right? In those regions that are important for theory of mind and empathy and bonding and caregiving. So the more fathers are involved in child care activities, the more their brain changes. And so we did some research on this in our own lab, where we looked at the hypothalamus in fathers. And so the hypothalamus is a region that is generally important for keeping the body's balance, sleep, feeding, sexual activity, many other things. But it is also crucially involved in caregiving and stress regulation. And so what we found is that the hypothalamus was larger in fathers who had stronger caregiving beliefs. So in fathers who believe that being a dad is important for child development, and dads who said that they enjoyed interacting with their kids. So there is a direct link between brain structure and the way fathers perceive fatherhood. Now, it's also very important to keep in mind that this relationship between father involvement and neurobiological changes has also been observed in non-biological fathers. For example, in same-sex male couples. So in other words, everybody can become a caring and involved and confident parent, and every man can become a caring and involved and confident father. There just need to be enough opportunities and time for practicing parenting skills.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And so that, just going back to what you were saying about the hypothalamus. So do we know, is it clear whether the hypothalamus is bigger because of the practice that the fathers do, or is it bigger because of their beliefs, or how does that work? Is it possible to find that out?
That's an excellent question. So in our research, we can't really say which way the relationship goes, because we looked at fathers at one time point when their children were 5 to 6 years old. And so we could only describe a correlation between the two variables, between the hypothalamus size and the caregiving beliefs. So we can't really make a causal assumption, right? That those men who had a bigger hypothalamus, that they then were more involved, had stronger caregiving beliefs, or whether it's the other way around. But very likely, most of these kinds of processes are driven by a combination of nature and nurture, of a combination of genes and environment. So it's very likely that it can actually go in both ways, and that both of these ways are meaningful, even though at the time and right now we still don't really know what causes what.
Okay, so I'm really interested in father-child bonding and how that works, because as a dad myself, I've sort of been through that. I experienced it when my son was very small, and it did feel to me like a real kind of give and take experience. And I feel like the stuff I've read since then seems to back that up. And I know that I've seen you talk about this concept of neural synchrony. can you kind of give us a bit of an overview of that?
Yes, I'd love to do that. So there are two aspects in your question, right? So one is related to bonding and attachment, and the other one is related to neural synchrony.
Mm.
And as you hopefully will see at the end of my answer, these two concepts are strongly linked with one another. But let's start with attachment first. So, like for the perception that men are not made to become fathers because they are wired differently, there was also the perception that men cannot be children's primary attachment figures. And this perception has been around for quite a while, right? It started with the description of attachment theory in the 1950s and 60s, and it has only slowly started to change. But the good thing is that there is change happening right now, and that attachment theory nowadays recognizes that children can have several attachment figures, and that child-father attachment or father-child bonding play a crucial role for child development. So in fact, research has shown that child-father attachment is equally important as child-mother attachment, and that it is best for children if they grow up having a secure attachment to both parents. So the more secure attachments, the better. Now, regarding neural synchrony, this is a relatively new objective and neurobiological measure of the child-parent relationship quality. And synchrony specifically refers to the brains of children and parents becoming attuned to one another. So you can really think that they are literally being on the same wavelength, that there are similar activations and deactivations in similar regions at roughly the same time in both brains. And in our own studies, we have shown that there is increased neural synchrony when children interact with their parents, both with moms and dads, and that the degree of the neural synchrony associates with relationship quality. So maybe again an example to be a bit more specific. So we found that specifically related to child-father neural synchrony and the relationship, that there was more neural synchrony during interaction in those child-father pairs in which fathers had stronger caregiving beliefs, the same that I already described to you before, right? That fathers believe that being a dad is important, and that they said that they enjoyed interacting with their kids. And we are now extending these findings by also measuring attachment more directly, bonding, and other variables, but we are not there yet. But stay tuned for more exciting data, hopefully to become available soon.
I love this, and I've got this kind of mental image of you looking at the two brains simultaneously and finding, you know, I don't know, the same colors appearing at a certain point, or is that how it works?
It's a bit less fancy, to be honest. I mean, when we then derive the result pictures, we try to visualize it really nicely, but it's actually quite difficult to see these synchronization patterns in real time.
Right.
But it's always exciting, you know, we have these new portable devices that we put on the child's head and the father's head, and we have them puzzle or we have them talk to one another. And then we also, you know, video record everything and we code the interaction and the behavior. So it's really something very nice to see, because you can literally see attachment in action when you do such kind of research.
Amazing, fascinating. So I've read that there has been some research recently. So obviously, well, I suppose what we're talking about here is you know, chemicals and parts of the physical brain activating and switching on and switching off, and all these sort of things that happen inside us. I've seen some research suggesting that when all of this is happening, men that some men can become kind of vulnerable to mental health issues. Is that right? And if so, can you talk a bit about that?
Yes, again, that's a brilliant question, because there are always two sides of the coin, right? There's always some pros and cons. And so this is research that was done in the lab of Darby Saxbe by Magdalena Martinez Garcia. They are based at the University of Southern California. And they showed two things. So on the one hand, they showed that in their study, those men who had the strongest change in brain structure after becoming dads, they told them that they spent more time with their children, that they felt more pleasure in interacting with their children, and that they were less stressed. But on the other hand, the exactly same men who showed the strongest change in brain structure after becoming dads, they also reported greater depression, greater anxiety, more general psychological distress, and worse sleep after the birth of their child. And so these findings really very nicely illustrate that the brain changes in new fathers can reflect both adaptation, but they can also reflect vulnerability. So the very same changes that are linked with fathers' involvement in caregiving can also increase their risk of sleep problems and mental health issues. And so these findings point to, let's say, a cost of caregiving for fathers, especially those fathers who participate in hands-on parenting.
Wow. So I mean, could one say, is it almost like when that aspect of you as a human is switched on, the sort of caregiving side of you, let's say, what we're saying is that there can be some sort of additional side effects that go with that.
Yes, I think you can put it that way. It's a huge change that happens to men, right, when they become fathers. And this change is also reflected in their biology and in their brain structure and activation. And of course, every time there is change, this is not only related to fatherhood, right? This is related to many other things. If we live through a romantic breakup, or if we make new relationships, if we move house, many other things, there are always benefits related to that, but there are always also some risk factors associated with this. And of course, why shouldn't there be any risks with becoming a dad, right? It's a huge change that affects everything, and you have to cope with that, right? So it can really profoundly change you, and with any type of profound change, there is always a certain risk for adverse effects.
Yeah. I think it's fantastic that you're doing the work you do to shine a light on this most human of experiences. I feel like that it's such an important area of work, because as you were saying earlier, I feel like we've been sort of stumbling around for a long time with this notion that all of this stuff is not really men's business. It's not men's game somehow. And I mean, as you know, we at the Institute are, try to do what we can to advocate for policies and services that support men in this kind of hands-on caregiving. So we're very much working towards, better paternity and parental leave. We're starting to think in terms of what would a national paternity service look like. And I wonder, sort of based on your knowledge and research, what sorts of things do you think one should throw into that? What kind of support do you think fathers should be getting?
Yeah, I think the Fatherhood Institute does incredibly important work, and this initiative is really, really crucial. And I'm, of course, wholeheartedly supporting this initiative, not only as a researcher, but also as a father. And so from what I see from my research on the social neuroscience, on attachment, bonding, and caregiving in fathers, maybe a few things that could be relevant can be mentioned, right? I could make a few recommendations. So, for example, to start with, I think that should always be included from the very beginning in any services related to the preparation for and then the actual childbirth. So the earlier dads can, because the earlier dads can form a close bond with their children, even if they are not born yet, the better their brain and body can adjust, and the more involved dads will be later on. So the sooner we can basically kick off these changes in the brain and in the body, the more times dads have to adjust to that, and the better these mechanisms can then start working when the child is born and during the early months of the fatherhood. Then I think that fathers should also have access to services explaining and promoting the importance of father-child bonding and child-father attachment. But this will also necessitate a change in the general societal perception of fatherhood and also masculinity. So basically, in the appreciation of the importance of father-child relationships for child development and the role fathers play for the family, more generally speaking. Then I think what fathers also need is better access to mental health services, and specifically services that recognize that dads are also vulnerable to developing mental health problems after the birth of their child. Because we have talked about this, right? Because these mental health problems are related to the many biological changes that man's body and brain undergo during the transition to fatherhood, plus all the other changes that happen around them. So it's actually completely normal and natural that there might be some problems, and this has to be recognized. And I think maybe finally, I think that that need better paternity and parental leave policies, because they need as much time and space as possible to interact with their children and to bond with them. Again, the earlier the better, because this not only helps dads to develop a better relationship with their children, but it also makes dads feel more confident and make them just feel better, which in turn supports their partners and helps the entire family to function better. And so in the end, it ultimately benefits the society as a whole. So it's a win-win for everybody.
Brilliant. I couldn't agree more. So just before I let you go, tell me what you're working on. Well, tell me what you're working on now and what you've got coming up.
So when we talk about attachment, bonding, and neural synchrony, so far we have only looked at mother-child pairs and father-child pairs separately. We never looked at the whole mother-child, father, family unit, the triad, as we tend to say. And so that's what we are doing right now. So we are always inviting mom, dad, and child to the lab at the same time. And the ultimate goal is to measure neural synchrony, behavior, and other things from all of the three of them simultaneously at the same time. Right now, we still only have two devices to measure neural synchrony. So we decided to focus on the parents only, because not many studies look at parent-parent synchrony when they interact with the child. And this might, of course, also be very important for the relationship between the parents and the children. But ultimately, we want to also put a functional near-infrared spectroscopy device on the child's head and measure how the child synchronizes with the mom, how the child synchronizes with the dad, and how the mom and the dad synchronize with one another at the very same time. And luckily, I have built a very fruitful collaboration with the local NHS, through which we will now be able to acquire this third device. And also through that collaboration, we will be able to not only look at healthy controls, as we say, so just normal healthy participants, but we can also start looking into families who have neurodivergent children, or who have children with other special needs, families with children who have experienced care or adoption. And so to extend our questions to many more contexts, also maybe including same-sex couples and other family constellations, more non-traditional family constellations. So yeah, there is lots of exciting stuff happening, and I hope that maybe in some times I can tell you more about the first results of all of that.
Definitely. We will look forward to it. Thanks very much for giving us your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.